Imagine a Boeing 747 built for 400 people. Now, fit 1,088 inside. It sounds physically impossible, but it really happened. On the 24th of May in 1991, and the record still stands until this very day. The plane even landed with more people than it took off with, because 2 babies were born mid-flight. The airline behind that flight is El Al. And El Al is also the most attacked airline in aviation history, hijacking, bombs hidden in luggage, and missiles fired at its jets. And in 2024, while foreign carriers abandoned its home country, it banked over $500 million. This is how the most targeted airline on Earth became the hardest one to kill. El Al did not start as a business. It started as an escape plan. September 1948. Israel is 4 months old and at war. Its first president, Chaim Weizmann, is stuck in Geneva with no way home. Foreign airlines will not fly into a war zone, and the land borders are sealed. So the Israeli military takes one of its Douglas C-54 transports, paints over the military markings, invents an airline name to put on the side, and flies him home. That improvised paint job becomes a real company 2 months later. The name they made up means "to the skies." Its first scheduled route launched in July 1949, Tel Aviv to Paris, once a week, on worn-out, unpressurized DC-4s bought secondhand from American Airlines. But the schedule was never the point. In its first years, El Al and its partners airlifted over 100,000 Jewish refugees out of Yemen, Iraq, and across the Middle East, ripping the seats out of 50 passenger aircraft and packing in more than double that number per flight. For most of those passengers, it was the first airplane they had ever seen. Then came the price of the neighborhood. On July 27th of 1955, an El Al Lockheed Constellation flying from Vienna to Tel Aviv drifted off course into Bulgarian airspace at the height of the Cold War. 2 Mikoyan Gurevich 15s scrambled, and as the airliner neared the Greek border, they opened fire. The Constellation exploded and came down near the town of Petrich. All 58 people on board were killed. It remains the deadliest day in the airline's history and the only El Al aircraft ever shot down more than 70 years ago. Remember that, because everything that came after is the story of an airline deciding it would never happen again. The turning point came on the 23rd of July, 1968. El Al Flight 426, a Boeing 707, from Rome to Tel Aviv. Shortly after takeoff, 2 armed men forced their way into the cockpit, pistol-whipped a pilot, and announced a new destination, Algiers. The hostage crisis dragged on for about 40 days before every passenger came home alive. Scholars point to that flight as the moment terrorism went airborne. But here is the part almost nobody knows. It was also the last time it ever worked on El Al. 1 successful hijacking in 77 years. Over the following decade, militants tried roughly a dozen more times against Israeli aircraft. Every single attempt failed. Why? Because El Al stopped acting like an airline and started acting like a security agency with wings, with measures the rest of the world called paranoid. Armed sky marshals on every flight, decades before America adopted them. Locked, reinforced cockpit doors, more than 30 years before 9/11 forced everyone else to install them. Reinforced floors between the cabin and the cargo hold. And underneath it all, one radical idea. The bomb should never reach the airplane in the first place. The world got its proof on September 6, 1970, the day of the famous Dawson's Field hijackings, when Palestinian militants went after 4 airliners in one coordinated operation. TWA, Swissair, Pan Am, all taken. The 4th target was El Al Flight 219 out of Amsterdam. 2 hijackers, including Leila Khaled, one of the most famous militants of the era, stormed the cabin. The pilot threw the 707 into a dive. A sky marshal shot 1 attacker. The crew and passengers overpowered Khaled, and the plane landed safely in London. And here is the detail that proves the point. 2 more hijackers were supposed to be on that El Al flight, but its ground screening turned them away at the gate. So they walked over and took the Pan Am 747 instead. 3 airlines lost their aircraft that day. The one airline that trained for it did not. So the attackers changed tactics. If you cannot take the plane from the inside, sneak the bomb aboard in someone else's bag. In December 1985, gunmen attacked El Alchek encounters in Rome and Vienna. And in April 1986 came the case that is still taught in security courses today. Her name was Anne-Marie Murphy, 32 years old, Irish, several months pregnant, checking in at London Heathrow for El Al Flight 016 to Tel Aviv with around 375 people booked on board. She was flying to meet the parents of her fiancé before their wedding. She had already cleared Heathrow's own security. Her bag had been x-rayed, and nothing alarming showed. But the El Al check-in is not a metal detector. It is a psychological interview, a set of questions designed to find contradictions. Her ticket had been rebooked. She was traveling alone while heavily pregnant. She had not packed her own bag, and she could not explain how she would pay for her hotel. So an El Al agent emptied her carry-on completely and noticed something no machine can feel. The empty bag was still too heavy. Behind a false bottom sat 1.5 kilograms of Semtex plastic explosive. The detonator was hidden inside a working pocket calculator, timed to fire about 2 hours and 15 minutes after takeoff at 39,000 feet, somewhere between Italy and Greece. Murphy had no idea that her fiancé, a man named Nezar Hindawi, working with a foreign intelligence service, had packed the bag himself and sent her and his own unborn child to die. He got 45 years, one of the longest sentences a British court has ever handed down. And El Al's security interview, the annoying, invasive, 3-hour early check-in that travelers complain about, had just saved close to 400 lives because a human being noticed that an empty bag felt wrong. And the machine kept evolving. Suspicious luggage goes into a decompression chamber that simulates altitude to trigger any bomb built to go off mid-flight. Most of its pilots come out of the Israeli Air Force. And after 2 shoulder-fired missiles narrowly missed an Israeli charter jet taking off from Mombasa, Kenya in 2002, Israel did something no other country has done. It armed its airliners. Today, El Al jets carry a laser system called C-Music in a pod under the fuselage. If a heat-seeking missile is fired at the aircraft, the pod detects it, tracks it, and blinds its seeker head with a laser automatically in about 2 seconds before the pilots can even react. It costs roughly $1 million per aircraft, and Israeli Airlines are the only ones on Earth that fly with it. That is not an airline security program. That is a national defense system with a boarding pass. So by the early 90s, El Al had built a reputation as the airline that could not be brought down. But even the most secure airline in the world could not prepare for what happened over Amsterdam. On a rainy October evening in 1992, an El Al aircraft was brought down, not by terrorists, not by a missile, by 2 small metal pins. El Al Flight 1862 was a Boeing 747 freighter, flying from New York to Tel Aviv with a stopover at Amsterdam. Minutes after takeoff, climbing through 6,500 feet, the fuse pins holding engine number 3 to the wing snapped. They had been quietly cracking from metal fatigue. The engine tore away, shot forward, then fell back and ripped engine number 4 off with it, taking a 30-foot section of the wing's leading edge along. The crew fought for 8 minutes to bring the crippled jumbo back to Amsterdam airport. The last transmission was 3 words, repeated, going down, going down,
going down, going down. Synchrate, pull up.
The aircraft rolled, nose dived, and hit the corner of 2 apartment towers in an outer district of Amsterdam. Officially, 43 people died, including everyone on board. And the true number on the ground was probably higher because the buildings housed many undocumented residents. The investigation answered the how. A design weakness in the 747's engine pylons, the same failure that had brought down a China Airlines freighter 10 months earlier. Boeing redesigned the mounts, and no 747 has lost an engine that way since. But the aftermath scarred El Al in Europe for a decade, because years later it emerged that the cargo included chemicals that can be used in nerve agent production. Bound for a research institute in the Netherlands, the questions around that flight lasted far longer than the crash investigation itself. The Fortress airline had a secretive side, and for once, the secrecy cost it dearly. Now step back and look at El Al as a business, because on paper, this airline should not exist. Start with the self-inflicted part. In observance of the Jewish Sabbath, El Al parks its entire fleet from Friday sundown to Saturday night, every single week. That is roughly 52 flying days a year voluntarily deleted, with aircraft stranded at foreign airports, racking up parking and crew costs, while competitors fly 7 days a week. Every meal it serves is kosher. No other major airline carries rules like these. Then add the geography. For most of its history, El Al could not overfly Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, or the Gulf. Look at a map and you realize what that means. Its home sits at the crossroads of 3 continents, and almost every shortcut was closed. Flights to Asia took enormous detours. Add security costs, no rival pays, no membership in any global alliance, and a war roughly once a decade that empties its cabins overnight. 1956, 1967, 1973, 2023. The pattern repeats. Foreign airlines pull out, and El Al turns itself into a lifeline, flying in reservists and supplies while its tourist revenue evaporates. In the Yom Kippur War, it gutted the interiors of its jets for cargo within days, and its crews flew around the clock. The bill came due in 1982. Drowning in debt and paralyzed by strikes, El Al went insolvent, and the government shut the whole airline down for months. It restarted in 1983 under receivership with dissolved union contracts, 1,000 fewer employees, and an ex-fighter pilot in charge. Within 4 years, it was profitable again. And along the way, this small, sanctioned, shutdown airline pulled off one of the great forgotten feats in aviation. In 1984, its new Boeing 767 flew Montreal to Tel Aviv nonstop, the first scheduled transatlantic crossing ever operated by a twin-engine jet, threading a route that obeyed the strict diversion rules of the era. Every twin jet crossing the Atlantic today, every 787 and A350, is flying through a door El Al opened. The 90s brought the immigration wave that produced the record from our opening. In 1990 alone, El Al flew 120,000 immigrants out of the collapsing Soviet bloc. A year later came Operation Solomon, 14,300 Ethiopian Jews rescued from Addis Ababa in 36 hours, including that 747 with 1,088 people on board, the flight that is still in the Guinness Book of World Records. One more detail about that flight. The captain, Aryeh Oz, was a Holocaust survivor who had been hidden from the Nazis as a child by a Dutch family. 50 years later, he was flying 1,000 refugees to safety in a single airplane. But records do not pay bills. Through the late 90s and 2000s, El Al lurched between profit and crisis. Open skies deregulation flooded Tel Aviv with almost 100 competing airlines that could all fly cheaper. The second intifada and 9/11 emptied its planes, and at one point the company burned through 5 CEOs in 5 years. Privatization finally came in the 2000s, and modernization came in 2015, with an order for up to 15 Boeing 787 Dreamliners. The last 747 was retired in 2019, and on its farewell flight, the pilots drew a giant outline of a 747 on-flight radar for the whole Avgeek world to see. Then COVID arrived, and El Al hit the closest thing to death in its history. Passenger flights stopped, more than 90% of its people were sent home. It owed passengers roughly $285 million in refunds, with only about $130 million in the bank, plus the debt from all those new Dreamliners. The government refused a simple bailout, the controlling family refused to put in more money, and that is when the strangest twist in this whole story walked in. His name was Eli Rosenberg, 27 years old, a yeshiva student living in Jerusalem, born in New York, with 0 airline experience, backed by his father's American nursing home fortune. Israeli business media even reported that the family rabbi encouraged the purchase. In September 2020, his company bought just under 43% of El Al for $107 million. He was the only bidder. The airline's own board tried to block him. Think about that. A national institution, 72 years old, sold to a student for less than the price of a single 787. It looked like charity. It turned out to be the buy of the decade. By late 2022, El Al was profitable again, running leaner with far fewer staff. And then October 2023 changed everything. War broke out. And within days, nearly every foreign airline suspended flights to Israel. El Al kept flying. For long stretches, it was functionally the only bridge in and out of the country, and its share of traffic at Ben Gurion exploded overnight. Load factors hit 94%. In 2024, the airline posted a record profit of $541 million, and the stock became one of the best performers on the Tel Aviv exchange. And yes, the flip side is real. Fares jumped, passengers and politicians accused the airline of profiting from a captive market, and El Al pointed at its brutal cost base while announcing steps to hold prices down on key routes. Both things can be true at once. 2025 brought reality back. Foreign airlines returned. A 12-day war with Iran closed the airspace and wiped about $100 million off the results, and profit eased to just over $400 million. But revenue still hit a record of nearly $3.5 billion. The company is sitting on almost $2 billion in cash, and it paid its first dividend since 2017. And now it is spending like a winner. 20 firm Boeing 737 MAX 9s with options for 11 more, the largest aircraft order in its history, arriving from 2028, 6 more 787-9s, plus orders converted to the bigger stretch 787-10, growing the Dreamliner fleet into the 2030s. Around 50 aircraft today, roughly 60 destinations, and every single jet a Boeing, as it has been for the entire jet age. So the airline born from a repainted military transport, shot at, hijacked once, bombed at its counters, and bankrupted twice, is now one of the most profitable airlines on the planet for its size. A company that parks its planes for religion and arms them with lasers for war. Which leaves one question I want you to fight about in the comments. The Sabbath rule costs El Al real money every single week, and it has for 77 years. If you were the CEO, would you keep the tradition that defines the airline or chase the extra 52 days of revenue? Tell me below, and also tell me why. If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribing to ExPlaned is the best way to see the next one. Thank you for watching this video. Stay safe, healthy, and kind, and I will see you in the next one.